ahead and call this meeting to order. I want to remind you that this is a budget hearing and then board work session. So we are here for the first two sessions to listen to the public if they have comment. And we're starting with the amended, correct? 2020, 2021 budget, and we didn't have anybody
signed up
to speak. Okay. So then the next is the next year's budget, the 2021, 2022, same thing, just here if people have comment. And it appears that nobody has got signed up to comment. So seeing that, we will adjourn and move to the work session of this meeting. So we have our legal service request.
So we've invited the two responsive folks. We have our current attorneys, and then we also have a representative from Anderson, Julian, and Hall. Maren, would you just like to, do you guys want to ask questions, or would you like Maren to speak? I requested they be present.
Thank you.
Good evening, trustees. I am here hopefully mainly to answer any questions that you have. We submitted our RFQ response, and hopefully you've had a chance to kind of flip through that. It largely mirrors what we've been doing for the past 3 years, with a couple updates on numbers that you guys have already approved in our past contract approvals. So that has been updated, and we're looking at keeping those the same for this next contract term if we are selected to continue legal services. So without like repeating everything that's in our RFQ, through section 1, general information, we outlined there a lot of the experience and different services that our firm presents and some of the efficiency and low cost that we are known for throughout the Valley and throughout our municipal clients. And then as well, in section 2, the district requested that we share expertise and experience in several different areas. So that's pretty detailed in responding to that request and outlining the things that our firm specializes in, the things that we have experience with, and the way that we can handle all of those issues with the personnel that we have on staff. The customer service standards in section 3 outlines how we communicate with the board and with the administration and within our own office, and how we handle requests and communication back to the district. And then it also outlines that we will be in attendance at meetings upon request. I think one thing that has been really nice for us in the past 3 years, and I hope the district agrees, is the location of our offices. I have not often, but a few times in the past 3 years, been able to attend a same-day meeting over here by just hopping over from our office. And then being able to attend and be part of meetings with, whether it's HR, whether it's the administration, or board meetings in the evenings. We've been able to prioritize those and be in attendance for that. The legal service structure is typically what most boards want to look more closely at, because that is our pay structure, our fees and costs. And we go over, usually when we do these presentations and we are putting in RFQ response for the first time, we go very detailed through how our retainer structure works, because there are a few things that are out of retainer. Most everything is in retainer. We went through that pretty exhaustively through a list of, we were able to go through some FAQs that the board had when we did this prior, and hopefully sorted out all of that and kind of helped narrow the scope of how we run our retainer. But just kind of as a very brief reminder, we put everything into our monthly retainer. We calculate that on an average hourly basis. So we take what we would, and we do this mathematically every year to update. And I actually ran the numbers for 2021 as well, if you're interested. But We take an average number of monthly hours that we typically spend with the district. We multiply that by an hourly rate. We do offer a discounted hourly rate for all of our public agency clients. And then we come up with the monthly retainer cost. That cost is the same every month, regardless of how many hours the district uses us. Some months it's very skewed in the district's favor, other months it's skewed in our favor. Across the year, it should average out to be about equal. As you can see in the RFQ response, our estimate kind of shows an 11 to 12 hour average. And then we have recently increased our hourly rate just to come into line with a lot of what ICRIM's using, ISBA is using, things like that. But the retainer amount is staying the same for this next proposal. So you'd still be at the $19.80 per month, and that includes everything except for 3 things, and that's litigation, which is assigned outside our firm. So there is some litigation that our firm will handle. If it goes through the insurance company, or it is a special field and it is assigned to an outside firm, we do not bill in addition to that outside firm. We let the outside firm handle the litigation, and we're not part of that. If we handle the litigation, we set up a new file for the district and bill it as a litigation matter, but at the $175 an hour. We don't charge our typical attorney rate of $250 an hour. The other thing is, if there's need for highly specialized attorneys, we typically refer these things out. For example, a lot of times we use bond counsel as an example for our municipal clients, because that is something where people are highly specialized. An example that I can think of for the school district that we've ran into for several years is special ed. A lot of times if there's something really highly specialized like that, where they're very trained and expert attorneys in that field, will refer that out. And then again, we won't bill on that unless we are billing in conjunction with outside counsel by approval of the district. We won't bill unless that's approved. And then the last thing that is outside of the retainer, which I can't think of anything in the past 3 years that we've had to do this for, but it's legal tasks that involve significant attorney time. So an example that I typically use for this is a complete redraft or review of an employee handbook, a manual. That typically will take more than just, a few hours time. It might eat up an attorney's time for an entire week or more. And given that, we take that outside the retainer because it's not a routine legal service. It's something special that we are going to input a lot of our attorney and firm time into. So other than that, everything's covered by the retainer, which has been very helpful for us in the sense that we find our clients aren't nervous or hesitant to call us. Every now and then when we've taken over certain cities or districts or counties, a lot of times they ask, well, what are we going to be charged if we call you or if we have a question? And the answer for our firm is nothing. It's included in the retainer. So any administrator or the board or anybody that's authorized by the district to have direct access to us can call us directly, and we'll be able to handle those things without somebody worrying about, oh, can I talk, this long to an attorney and how much is it going to cost the district? So that's kind of a brief rundown of the fees and costs and how we structure it. I think you guys are pretty familiar with that, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Like I said, I did run the 2021 numbers just in case you are curious. I just pulled the number of attorney hours that we've been spending for the past 5 months and then averaged it just so you could see kind of where the district is sitting right now. In January, we were at about 10.4 hours, February 17.15, March 9.7. So that was, a great month. Everybody was happy. April 10.2 hours, and then May, as you all put in so much time in May, so did we. We billed 22.85 hours that month. So for 2021, the average currently is about 14 hours a month. So currently this year, the district is what we would say, quote unquote, ahead, but typically through the summer, that drops. So I assume it'll even out by this fall. So yeah, that includes, so that's where the 1980 a month comes from. If we were to bill that at our 250 hourly rate, it'd be much higher. If you bill that around $200 an hour, you're probably looking about $3,000 per month or so. And we're at 1980. So significant cost savings, the way that we run the program and the way that we use our monthly retainers. And hopefully it kind of helps with the efficiency and just the ability of the district to contact us and have direct access. So that's kind of a rundown of our RFQ. If you guys have specific questions to what we responded or anything else, I'm happy to answer those questions.
Any questions for anyone?
Sure.
Yeah.
Were we consistently at the standard retainer of the 1980, or were there extra services that we went over that we needed to add on to?
Yeah, Trustee Ross, we didn't have any additional services, especially this year. And like I said, I can't even think in the past 3 years if there's been that many. So typically we've hit the average just about right. You guys saw the increase, I believe it was last contract term, and that was only because we increased the hourly rate. We didn't necessarily increase the average of hours that we were spending. So we were just trying to come up a little bit more to market with that hourly rate. But yeah, typically with this client, we get just about right on the average hours, which isn't always the case with a lot of our public agency clients, but this one we hit just about right.
Other questions? Excellent. Thank you.
All right,
Very,
thank
very
you.
much. We appreciate you being here.
So Brett Walter is here from Anderson, Julian and Hall.
Good evening, everyone. As Dr. Carter said, I'm Brett Walter, Anderson, Julian Hall. I didn't prepare a presentation. I was asked to come and answer questions. I'm sure you've all received our proposal, and so I'm not going to go in grand detail about that, other than to say our firm, I'm not a bragging kind of person, though. This is probably the preeminent education law firm in the state. We have 4 partners I'm the youngest, and I started practicing in '92, and we have 3 others that have more experience, and pretty much that's all we do. We also have 3 associates. We can handle and have handled every question you can imagine in education law, probably some you can't imagine. We do special ed. We have 1 partner that's our special ed guru. We do everything from bidding on public works construction to all kinds of employment issues, to student issues. I don't know if you remember, we got retained by your insurance company a few years back and defended the David Day matter and managed to get rid of that pretty quickly. So we have a very good staff, a lot of experience. We work very hard at finding the best, most reasonable solution to school district problems. That being said, a lot of the calls we would be getting would probably be day-to-day problems, and that is, I handle day-to-day calls from superintendents every day, probably 5 to a dozen times a day, in addition to my other work. And that's just what we do. It's the day-to-day questions, day-to-day operations, questions about everything from leave to student issues to open enrollment. I mean, they come from every direction all the time, and there's really never a dull moment. And we all handle those daily. There was a lot of talk before me about the retainer structure, and interestingly, we don't have any clients on a retainer structure. Now, that's not to say we certainly wouldn't entertain a retainer type of a contract, but we found that, and I've never had any of my clients say, I don't want to call you because I'm afraid of the cost. It's, it depends on the district. Some districts call almost daily. Others I might not hear from for a month or so, a month to 6 weeks. It just depends on the district and the issues. We find that our districts like to use us as they need us, and if they don't need us, they don't have to call us and they don't have to pay us. Again, we are flexible. If the school district prefers the retainer, we can certainly work on that. I don't have experience with your particular needs, so I don't know whether you need 10 hours a month or 40 hours a month. So it's hard for me to put a number on that, but we can certainly work on that. The numbers we have quoted are for our fees and rates are our average numbers. Again, those can be negotiated depending on the situation. A regular client that does regular business obviously has some efficiencies and benefits and will typically get a lower rate. So that's kind of what we do. It's you know, we Brian Julian, I'm sure you've heard of him, has argued more education law cases to the Idaho Supreme Court than any other attorney in Idaho. We're in federal court all the time. I just got a federal case dismissed. I personally handle lots of Title IX issues, both from the investigation point of view. So the district is like, hey, we just got a Title IX complaint in. How do we do it? I helped ISBA draft the policy for conducting a Title IX investigation, including all the procedures, not just the policy, but also the procedures. We did both. And I will walk the poor Title IX investigator who's never done one before and never seen the new regulations through the process from intake, you know, through the investigation, through the writing of the report, issuing it to the decision maker, identifying kind of the various ramp-offs if it's not a Title IX issue that can be dismissed, and all the way through appeal. And then sometimes if those go to litigation, I'll then be trying in federal court before Judge Windmill or Judge Nye and see what they have to say. So there's a whole lot to talk about in education law, and our firm has a whole lot of experience, so I don't want to bore you all because I'm sure you got important district business to take care of rather than just listen to me. So I'll toss it out to any questions you might have about me or our firm.
Any questions?
Chair,
Yeah, go for it.
do you find that you typically listen in or attend the board meetings, the regular business meetings?
Board meetings is again totally up to the board. We have a couple of boards and a couple of districts that want to have counsel there, if not all the time, most of the time, and we are happy to do that, make ourselves available, just 24-hour notice.
And then we know that that's your standard hourly rate for the time that we're.
Right,
Okay.
right, yeah. And typically what we try to do rather than have me sit there for an hour doing nothing is identify when I'm going to be needed, when I'm going to speak, come in, you know, help out. Sometimes you have board meetings where I would have to be there all the entire board meeting, depending on the issues. You might be having some type of a hearing and you're going to have ongoing questions and issues throughout the hearing, throughout the board meeting, and we certainly can do that. We, as a group, travel literally all over the state, representing school districts, and you know, sometimes you know, getting out to Sugar Salem or Coeur d'Alene isn't always the most fun thing to do, but we cover the whole state. So traveling out to Nampa, I live in Meridian, it's really easy for me.
I just have one question. Walter, I really appreciate you being here and all.
Sure.
To compare apples to apples. It would be helpful to me to see a retainer. That might not be the norm for other districts, but that would be helpful to see what that fee structure might look like.
Okay, and like I said, I don't know the number of hours. I gleaned that it's approximately 10 to 15.
Sure.
And so then we could just, you know, kind of do the math.
And maybe that's the question I should ask.
Sure.
Because that's been fairly well established. Is the math just straightforward from the hourly rate that?
It's just going to be from the hourly rate.
Okay.
Correct?
Okay. Very good.
And like I said, we could be flexible on that. You know, assuming we get the same amount every month.
Yeah.
Then there's some efficiencies there that we can reduce the rate and it works out. But generally speaking, it'll be from the rate. You know, could be discounted some. And again, not knowing your needs, it was hard for me to just shoot out in the dark as to what I could promise, because I didn't want to give too low a number and I'm stuck doing work for nothing, or too high a number and just get scared away. So I wasn't really sure exactly where to place that guess, and you know, leave that open to negotiation.
You mentioned some negotiation room. Would that be done prior to if we were to select AJH for those hourly rates, or are you talking about like kind of in the process of if there's a big job that comes up along the way?
No, it would be before we start.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, it would be at the get-go, the signing of any contract. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes.
you're not a mile and a half away, your office is, but what can your clients expect in terms of a responsiveness to phone calls?
Phone calls, our practice is to try to get it answered the same business day. Obviously, that's not always possible. At the latest, we try to go to 24 hours. And what my practice is, if I've got email, say, or a voicemail, and I haven't got to by the end of the day, I'll shoot an email and let them know I will get back to you tomorrow morning. And give them a chance that, we need it now. But typically I try to get 24 hours or less if we can. Yeah, timeliness is very important. I know with a lot of the issues, you can't sit around and wait on an important question that might have to do with whether or not a teacher needs to put on leave while an investigation is occurring and those kinds of things. So lots of times questions do need to be answered quickly. We're very, very sensitive to that.
Should we choose to go with your firm? How does that impact the ICREP issues? Would you still be assigned cases like the one you referenced?
Yes, yeah, we represent, like I said, state or districts throughout the state. ICREP insures most of the districts in the state, and we will typically, and sometimes it's an advantage, actually see a situation we've dealt with before, trying to save it, and then they file suit anyways and get involved in the litigation side too. And actually, like I said, it's efficient because we're already familiar with the case and situation. But short answer, it doesn't affect us at all. It's a short answer.
Perfect. Thank you very much
All
for
right.
coming this evening.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate your time.
So just as a reminder, we expect to take action on that later in this month. That emerged from our January organization and trying to realign the appointment of our legal services with our calendar year. So we're looking at a 6-month through December and then an appointment then in January so that we're aligned versus I think it might be the last thing we have to do with all of the transition to the January organizational meeting. Next up, Gwen Hamlin is here to walk us through what we might have to do with certified staff contracts.
Trustees. So we more than likely will need to ask for permission from you guys to issue contracts based on 2021 salary amounts, because pursuant to Idaho Code 33514 and 515, we do have to issue contracts on or before July 1st. And unfortunately, we don't have an agreement, the district and the NEA, and we do have that deadline of July 1st. And then if we do come to an agreement, we would do like we did this past year, and we would, if we have new amounts, we would reissue those contracts with the new amounts. And we're also asking for certified staff to sign and submit their contracts within the 10 days of receipt of contract.
Just to clarifying questions, this is what was done last year,
Correct.
so it would just be the same, okay,
Same process.
Yeah. thanks.
We are hoping that we would reissue sometime in August or September and not April.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And obviously, we would issue with the minimum salary of $40,369 because last year it was $40,000.
So again, this would be an action item later in June. It could be that we come together and our negotiation team comes to or closer to an agreement, and we might not have to. It's more likely that in order to give them the time they need to be thorough, that we'll pursue this route and finish in a timely manner with negotiations without that rush.
Any other questions on this? Thank you, Gwen.
Mr. Dewey is here. We have looked at this information, I think monthly for the last 3, 4, maybe 5 months. Each month we learn a little bit more about the federal funds that are coming our way. And Mr. Dewey is going to recap in places where we have expenses identified, either past tense or in anticipation. We've identified those for you here as well.
Mr. Chairman.
All right, so basically what we put together for you that I'll go over rather quickly. If you have any questions, please stop me and during the meetings, during that time, because I want to make sure we answer the right questions at the right time. This is a mixture, as Superintendent Keller said, of things that have been done and things that will come. It's kind of like, is that the whole Christmas Carol thing? I don't know how that works. So that's kind of how we are with this. So the first things you see here, I've kind of split them up in areas that were very, very restrictive at the first part. Remember when everything was happening at the first part of March, April, May of last year. If you hear the word Khajiit hotspots anymore, I swear I removed those like 15 times in between of these. That's what a lot of these things were. You see the distance learning monies, the adult nutrition rebounds, social emotional learning, and the learning management system. Those were very dedicated monies from the state that basically said they had to go for these things, and we did use those for those items.
Quickly,
So then, yes, go ahead.
Go ahead.
as you're doing this, that bottom line total amount, does that mean we exhausted 100% of those funds?
Yeah, so if you go back, Peter, please. Everything in the first two and the last one is exhausted. The one currently where Peter's little marker is in the middle there, the 30,000 is currently in process of, because it's part payroll, because we're actually paying part of our PBIA coach with that. So by the end of this year, it will be exhausted.
And this is where it's slated to, and there's no extras.
All this money
All of
is
this
gone
is
and
100%
has to
of
be
the full
gone.
budget.
Yes,
Perfect, thank
exactly.
you.
So ultimately, I'm trying to put together a whole picture of what we've got from COVID monies from this are not these are not in addition to any of our other monies, like our regular federal grants. These are really from the pandemic and monies coming from the federal government. All right, so we go to the next one. All right, so this is the money that the governor, remember, replaced his $99 million and basically said we're going to give the raises based out of this. Unfortunately, the rules associated with this were very limited in what we could or could not do. One of the biggest parts of this was it could not be budgeted into the year, and we had to spend it on extra stuff. It's COVID relief funds, which came from the Department of Treasury, as opposed to the Education Department. So we did get $4.4 million with this. This money is fully expended. It needed to be spent by June 30 of this year. Originally, it needed to be spent by December 30, and they extended the deadline to June 30 this year. So we were able to do a couple more things with that. You see the areas that we did. I'm not going to read the slides for you guys. Obviously, you're good enough to read. But this money is 100% gone, and it is spent, and we have received 100% of the money from the state already.
Thank you.
So ESSER-1 is the very first amount of money that we got back in March. And that was the one we actually budgeted this money. And there was a lot of different stipulations with it. And this was the first part of an allocation to us that was based on Title I funding. So we received quite a bit of money of this because we are a high free and reduced lunch school district. So that's why we received $3.4 million of this. This grant is currently in the process of being spent. Right now, we have about $2.3 million that's still sitting in the budget, but that will be expended this year because of the reduction in our discretionary funding for the district. I anticipate utilizing the rest of ESSER-1 to take up the rest of that money and utilize the rest of this grant by June 30. Any questions on this grant? All right.
Sorry, June 30, 2021 or 2022?
2021. So we actually have until next year, but unfortunately, fortunately, we were able to use this money to be able to utilize to take advantage of this money because of the reduction in our discretionary money.
Okay.
We lost quite a bit of money with the governor's late minute change.
Yeah.
So.
Randy, on the amended budget then and the document, does that show up on the federal funds line?
Yes, so all of these that actually have anything to do with this year is all in the amended budget. So the COVID relief money is the biggest part that wasn't in last year's. The ESSER-1 was actually in the budget for last year because we actually knew about it last year and we have it. Now the line items were different, but we do, we did need to amend for ESSER one. We really needed to amend for the COVID relief, which is the 4.4 million one before, because remember that one couldn't have been budgeted.
Randy, will you remind us which line those showed up in the amended budget?
Right in the federal revenues.
Thank you.
Yep, so right here, see in the amended budget right here.
Yeah.
This used to say 400,000, 440,000 because of Peter's comp grant. Now we have 4.4 with that. And then the other ones aren't showing up in general fund, remember, because that ESSER one is actually in other funds. The COVID relief funds actually is the only one that's sitting in general funds. Any questions on ESSER one as we go through this? All right, let's go to the next one. Okay, ESSER two. So this one's a little bit more complicated because the state actually split this up into two separate allocations for us. So effectively, we do have access to the entire thing, but unfortunately, the state legislature only approved so much of the ESSER two funds for the whole state to be allocated this year, and then the rest is allocated next year. We do not anticipate taking any of ESSER two this year at all because we're going to utilize the rest of ESSER one. The state wants us to draw down 100% of each ESSER first before we actually start getting into the next one. So ESSER one, we will have, but we are anticipating moving into ESSER two now at the beginning of the year, July 1. These are the areas that we have currently in the budget for ESSER two that you guys will hopefully adopt in a couple of weeks. These are the things on the right-hand side, appropriate use. We have a lot of these already gotten pre-approval from the state, like our HVAC and those upgrades that we have. Everything else is exactly what we anticipate to be used on there.
Several of these items you would see in our original thoughts for ESSER one, but because of the discretionary and because of drawing down ESSER one first, and then this, you'll notice that Lexia and NWA have moved to this funding source.
The one thing to recognize for all of these monies is one big crucial component for us on these is that it does allow us to have kind of a stopgap on our own general fund losses that with enrollment and those type of things, because it does allow us to try to keep the district whole. These grants are really supposed to try to help maintain some stability within the districts that were having these big swings. And so we've not tried to hit these grants too much with any kind of general overage with our general fund allocation, but it is something you'll see that very last line, general fund discretionary. And we're utilizing that in order to make sure that we're not creating any drastic holdbacks or anything like that with our schools at this point in time. Next year, we will look at that a little further as soon as we get a little bit more knowledge of where our enrollment's going to be at that. If you go to the next one. So ESSER 3, again, is the new one that came in January for, and that one, again, has the same, this one actually gets split into two different parts, where the other ones were basically one big chunk of money. This one actually has been told to split into two different parts. The first section is basically like regular ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, almost the exact same rules. They changed one rule out, but it's not really material to this. But the second part of that learning loss is something new that they started this year and have some very specific requirements associated with that. The beauty with a lot of our things that we're actually doing with ESSER 3, majority of what we were going to do for it anyway was already sitting in both of these categories. So really the most important thing for us is actually to make sure that we get our kids back up to where they need to be, correct? So when it's all said and done, we have some things up in HVAC upgrades, obviously don't have any material aspect in learning loss, but we do all these other areas. We had way more things in the learning loss categories when we're starting to do our brainstorming that we'll end up spending that amount first, and then we'll move into the other amount. This grant actually allows us to go up into September 30th, 2024. The state thinks that they might, in the very end, might be able to get one more year out of it, but we're not 100% sure, so we're not going to even risk that. But it is something that we're not planning in the budget you guys are currently see in front of you. We've put in only $2.7 million of this grant for that money. And I think it was $2 million in the learning loss and $700,000 in the regular monies in order to kind of have a little bit of budget, so we had budget authority for it. But we don't anticipate having to move too much into there unless something crazy happens in our world again. And I'm knock on wood, I don't think something is going to happen. Any questions on ESSER 3?
Randy, is that maintained staff, the 17 FTE from the prior?
So we're talking about that. The whole goal of this isn't to get ourselves bloated to where we all of a sudden now need to make drastic reductions in the future. So there are 17, Peter, if you'll go back to ESSER 2, there are 17 teachers here. There are also, a lot of these other areas have individual FTEs associated with them, because in order to do things, you have to have some people specialists in the community, and that. So there are FTEs associated with them, but the goal is to really little by little reduce that amount, or figure out different ways with Dover grants to be able to do it, or our general fund to be able to make those happen. But we are going to need some, whether or not it's all of it, we're 100% sure yet. So the goal is to minimize how many FTEs we have on this, so we're not stuck trying to, do any kind of reductions that we don't want.
And just as a reminder, when we budgeted at 640, that's a reduction of 25 staff members already. So we've identified areas in early learning, that K3 area, in order to maximize opportunities for class size. And then in the secondary area, we are working at moving CTE monies only to CTE programs, and some of those were to help our secondary schools step down.
Any other questions on ESSER 3? This is our big bucket here that we received recently. It was 3 times as much as the other one, which is quite a bit. But believe it or not, Greg would actually say this is, I think we have this is like $36 million, and I think we ended up with like $60 million of requests and different items on our spreadsheets that we're looking at. We spend weeks and weeks trying to whittle down. It's amazing when you have things out there that it's like, wow, this would really help. This would really help. And so we're trying to make sure we get those informations in. The biggest key is what we're looking at right off the bat is to make sure we understand what's going to get these kids back in line, get back in, a grade point faster. What are we going to do? What's the interventions we could do? And mental health is a big part of that as well. So we're going to really try to focus a lot of that time.
Randy, just a question on the learning loss. Is that homeless relief? Is that a social worker? Is that what it is? Okay. Thanks.
Yep, it is. And again, so we have a few years that we're trying to pay for these. So one year might be an ESSER 2, and then 2 more years in ESSER 3 is kind of how we're looking at those. So we have like a 3-year on these. And then we see what kind of federal grants are out there. If we need to maneuver some more monies from Title I and redirect when in year 4, those are the things we will start to talk about and see, okay, this was very successful, or this is something we don't want to do. And then we'll reevaluate in those years when we know when our federal grants are actually done.
Just one additional reminder, as you know, the legislature found ways to encumber our money before it came to us. So in here is covering the cuts that we experienced in curriculum instruction and online learning and in professional development and in our tech. So that's just a reminder that these are numbers, but some of that had to go in order to cover what would have come to the district through regular state allocations.
Can you share a little more about secondary summer school?
So yeah, so the learning loss is able to actually pay for summer school, and that's a big part of that. So what we're going to do, what we're trying to do is shift some of our money that we would normally spend, about $500,000 in expense a year, into these grants, open up our general fund, because again, the state hasn't fully, they didn't give us hardly anything in any discretionary increase this year. So to try to get those in, you see there's other areas that we've maintained general fund staffing and those type of things. That's just an area that we can shift over to this, that we can get off the general fund.
As Randy continues, there's another chunk of money to support us, and so maybe we should.
Yes, there's another chunk as well.
That, and then Trustee Westphal, if we haven't answered your question, ask it again, and we'll try to clarify.
Yep, and that's in a couple more slides. So we also did get a new amount. This is new. This was something that was coming out for our special education. And it's new allocations that we'll have for 3 years as well through the ART grants, ART Act. And we received $683,000 that we're planning on using for those items here. And the preschool is going to get an additional 60 for there. So those are great things that will help our special ed department. The biggest thing we're trying not to do, if you notice in these, there are no people on there. And that's a big reason. We're really trying not to bloat our system with these new federal grants. It's really trying to get the things that really help our students with things and one-time things as opposed to people. We want to go to the next. Any questions on this one before we move on? That one's a pretty simple one. And it has to be used for special ed, if you can imagine that. So. All right, so this is what Superintendent Keller was talking about. So the governor also put a set aside of his money, which is the CRF monies. You'll notice that 99 million he did before. This is the exact same type of money that was there. And he's put it out for 2 different buckets. The first one is a K through 4, and the other one is K through 12. Okay, and those 2 different buckets shall be used before December 30th of 2021. So we don't have a lot of time to use this money. And this is specifically about learning loss, literacy, and things like that we need to make sure we're spending this money on. The K through 12 summer, the plan for that is literally to take that chunk of money from the summer school costs, take a small portion of that, and then the rest is going to go into the literacy. And in the next 2 years, we're going to pay for that out of the ESSER 3. And then the other one is something new we're doing this year. You guys have probably heard about it. We have 5 schools that we're actually doing some elementary summer school. We have always had like a migrant program and maybe a little fun program for a week or so here, but this is actually a summer school program that we're doing on 5 schools. And so all those costs are going to go towards this. We're also looking at other curriculum and other areas that will help our K through 4 group really try to excel a little bit better. And this is great money that we will need to use, but it is definitely going to be hard to meet the December 30 deadline with this.
Does that help answer your question, Trustee Westfall, or?
I'll keep thinking.
Okay,
I think we have some more.
yeah.
There are technically 3 sources that can support us in the secondary summer schools. So we apply, and if our schools qualify for alternative fundings, and we have submitted the alternative funding, and so we'll receive some funds related to that. And then there is this piece from the governor, secondary summer school. And again, that one both of those are spent in this fiscal year, and so the ESSER 3 then will help us move and cover additional. We have more students in summer school, more sites offering summer school this summer for a variety of reasons, including advanced opportunities for some of our students if they want to get ahead or take college credit. So we're working individually with students on where they are and trying to fill in gaps or move them more quickly toward their goal of graduation.
So the whole concept here is that with moving some of the summer schools to these new funds is really, there's a chunk, especially this year and possibly the next year, that our regular funding from the general fund won't cut it. So if we want to make our budget the exact amount we're going to get from general fund revenues from the state, then there are some different cuts that we might need to make. But these grants are here to really try to help us so we don't have to make those cuts right away, or we can go at a slower pace and really maybe do it through attrition. Somebody's going to retire. So we're trying to do that instead. And this is an area that fits within these guidelines. So we're taking it off of the general fund expenses, moving it over to here where they fit exactly in the guidelines, which opens up less that we'll have to get from just discretionary overload from the monies before. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Randy, you mentioned this last slide. It'll be tough to spend it all by December because it just that much is not needed. That is
not it. So part of the issue we're going to have here, so on the summer school and that type of stuff, we're going to spend quite a bit. We're slated for the elementary at least to spend about $200,000 to $250,000 just on those alone. Okay, but the issue that I see here is that we're also trying to buy things at the same time everybody else is trying to buy things. So this product has to be in and it ready to go and try to get here. And so my worry is that, okay, that's great, unless we're trying to do something that's online and working on our devices. that there's just risk that I see that we might not get it in time before this and it'll just be lost money. It's not that we can't find ways to spend it. I guarantee we'll find ways to spend it on time. It's just making sure everything gets in and it fits within the guidelines associated with. And K-4 is difficult as well because remember our elementaries are K-5. So how do we make sure that we allocate only the K-4 portion of that? And then where do we find the other 5th grade to do this? Those are the type of things we have to really watch to make sure we're within the grant guidelines. I mean, Trustee Simpson, did you have a question?
No.
Okay. Want to go to the next one? So this is just a summary of the money that we have. The biggest thing I wanted to show here and what everybody's going to see is that, holy cow, and this is the same thing our legislators saw. You guys have a ton of money. You don't need our money. The only thing that I think really saved us in the legislative level is that all these had a maintenance of effort match, the requirement that the state couldn't drop us. If they could have dropped us, they would have dropped us because they wanted us to use all this money first before we actually got into our own. The hard part about this is it's not an equal distribution. All these weren't equal. We got a little bit more because we're free and reduced. Like West Data, they're very low free and reduced. So they got just barely above what we got in some of these big ESSER grants. So that's not really a fair thing for the state to do in my mind. So one of the things I really want to focus on here is all this money has to have something to do with COVID. So it's not like we can just discretionary, just pull it out and spend this money. We have to have some reasons for it. And that's the tough part on my side is to make sure what does get shifted over, if it does move from the general fund, it actually does have the capabilities of going to these grants to make the grant requirements. So it's not like we just have ability to just open up our coffers and just buy whatever. It has been a concerted effort to make sure we do it. And most of these things are new things that we're trying to buy to help help these students get past these last year and a half of school the way we've had to do it and get people back on track and get our students back on track. All right, we kind of talked about this a little bit. What the legislature did approve, because most of this was statutory, they did do the increase for the funding ladder and the 2% base increase for the administrative and classified. That's kind of a standard thing that they do now. They did the leadership pay again, and then they did the small, it makes it look like we had this great big increase to $29,000. Remembering last year that we actually received $22,000 because of the governor's holdback. Okay, that was the big discretionary loss that we're actually going to see. But last year's actually JFAC approved was like 28 something. It was only $655 difference from this 29,000. So all the state actually gave us this year in any kind of discretionary, they didn't give us anything for regular operational discretionary increases. They only gave us $655 per unit for healthcare increases. So their goal was to have us utilize the ESSER 1 and 2 and 3 for our discretionary changes over and moves expenses. And so that's what we have to do. In order, if we didn't want to do that, then we would have had to make quite a bit of cuts by now in order to make sure that our budget matched with it. And that's really what the concept behind the federal grants were to make sure we didn't need to do that. We did still, and this is what Superintendent Keller has talked about, the professional development and the state technology budgets. They were twice as much as they were supposed to be. And then the governor's holdback with those in half. The state actually kept those same amounts and then basically told us that we can use the other ones. And at first they actually confused the heck out of even themselves because they actually approved the higher amount, not realizing that they couldn't actually tell us by law to do it. And so they had to come back a few days later and rescind and tell us, oh, we think you can do this. Because their whole goal was to tell us and basically earmark that money for us. And they figured out real quick they couldn't do it. So that's a real big bummer for us because those are areas in our district that we're really trying to use effectively. And it was kind of a blow. We didn't get those back this year, especially when they had so much new money that they were available. And then the biggest one here, which really scares me, it scares a lot of people associated with is the PSEF. We kind of talked about that a while ago. The worst part about this PSEF part is that we won't even know what that loss is until June 30 or even July of 2022. So at the end of the year, I will not know what that loss is that's attributed to us until at least that. The calculations they've had for the last few years, My estimate could be around $1.5 million if they went over. And the bad thing is, it's nothing that we do. We just had more kids come into the state, or the career ladder cost a little bit more than what they budgeted, or fast forward funds, which is allocated for every kid. They end up spending more than we allocated. I mean, it has nothing to, it was a formula derived, but the allocation that the state gave was a little bit less than what actually ended up. Normally it goes into PSEF. Now for this year, they will not allow us to do that. Last 2 years, it's been $31 million that needed to be split up between the two into PSEF. So if we have that much hit us again, we'll probably be about $1.6 million that will hit us. Now, the beauty is, again, because we have the backstop of the ESSER grants, it's not going to hurt us. We're not going to have to, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. We also have our own fund balance that we'll be able to handle that. And we'll make sure that we're solid with our monies to make sure we're not overspending. But it is a scary thing that potentially $1.5 million could go away just like that at the end of the year, when we have no reason, we have no way to even combat it. Right. It's really kind of frustrating.
So that's the 30,000 foot overview and what we know today with all of the federal funds.
I'm sure it'll change in a couple of weeks.
And at the end of this month, so we're going to ask you to approve the budget that Mr. Dewey has set forward. And just as a reminder, there's $2.7 million in that budget that are from ESSER 3. We'd also like for you to consider, going back to the ESSER 3 slide, that this would be the tentative plan that the district would move forward. We'll again bring consistent updates to you. But this is the tentative plan. So for example, the learning loss money, we can use that before other pieces. So we want to be able to use that in its appropriate way. So that's kind of our tentative plan. The big buckets that we told the board we would bring before you are here on these slides.
Other questions? So, if you were stopped on the street and had to give the elevator speech of how are, these millions of federal dollars helping NAPA kids, we'd say, one, it's filling a budget hole that the legislature left for technology and curriculum and training. But we're also able to hire 17 teachers to work with elementary and secondary kiddos, mental health provider for our kids, and then tools for our teachers in assessment and intervention, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And then we're expanding summer school options. And our HVAC one and PPE, all the safety ones are in there. So safety bits are in there as well.
That's a very good way to put it, actually. So the one part about it is we're on the teacher side. The goal, I believe, on that is to maintain class sizes. And we want to make sure that that's, so we're not actually hiring me, we're just not reducing, if that makes sense, as much as the budget would mandate a 25 student reduction or teacher reduction. So we're making sure that we're not doing that much reduction, not to make sure we can keep our class sizes, especially at those levels, lower levels at a manageable level.
So when all the kids come back.
Well, if that's the case, then that's the best case scenario for us, right? Because at that point in time, then we've actually under budgeted it's kind of like our years when we were growth, right? You used to be in that teacher when we went 5-10 units below growth expectations, so you have to run higher. That's a good thing for us. I'd much rather be on that side than this slow decline that we've had for the last 4 or 5 years that we've seen in this district. So
And one last question. I
Yes.
think early on when we were talking about this and looking at like the HVAC, that we would be able to lower our levy when we come to the renewal. Does that still look like a possibility?
So remember, everything associated with the grants has to be COVID related or something. So there are parts to our levy ask that did have all these HVA systems on there. So there is hope that those areas would come off and we wouldn't have to ask for those in the future, right? But things like we have one roof that we actually are able to get in there because it actually is so intertwined with the HVAC. It was just hard not to kind of bifurcate it. But in most of the other things we have, like tracks, tennis courts with West and those, that has nothing to do with COVID, right? So we have to think about those ideas of, hey, these things are still not able to be handled with these grants, so we need to watch that. But you think about, see how much is coming off already, that is a good chunk of things that we can get done now, hopefully.
Madam Chair, I have one question. So thanks, Randy, for your presentation and all. The little footnote here that some of this ESSER 3 money is in the 21-22 budget threw me, because I thought you said earlier that you can't spend an ESSER that's been assigned more recently until the previous monies have been spent. So is ESSER 2 all going to be spent in the next budget year?
Yeah, so the plan is that entire $11 million of ESSER 2 will be spent. So we can then go into the ESSER 3 normal portion of ESSER 3.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense then.
Anything else?
Excellent.
Kind of quiet.
Thank you.
Mr. Jimmy's going to stay,
I'm
I believe,
here as well.
because he's going to talk about an idea that we would like the board to consider again later in this month related to a capital outlay fund creation.
All right, I put together a quick memo. I wasn't getting crazy here with it, but one of the things that's happened in the last few years is Mr. Jers has been a really great seller of buildings. So that's been great. The first one, as you guys remember, we sold the Parkview building and we used that, the majority of those proceeds to actually buy the warehouse that we were leased to own, right? So majority of that was kind of more of a swap of money. We didn't have a lot of money left over. But the block building, we did just sell that. I think closed this last month and we got the check. So those funds are coming in. The one thing about it, and I actually failed to put on here, and I didn't think about it until later, is that we actually have an obligation to put that money aside. We can't really just keep it in the general fund anyway, because we bought it with bond funds. So because we bought it with bond funds, we have to actually use it on capital projects. So those are things that we actually have to do because of the nature of what we bought the money for. The Parkview building we owned for a long time back in the day, so that one didn't have any issue. I didn't realize until my wonderful accountant, county manager reminded me that that's what happened. I was like, oh, well, she's been here forever. She knows what we bought with those bond funds, and that's what we use with that money. So what I'm asking to do is similar to what West Ada, Boise, and all these others do. They actually have a different fund in the capital project. So we put these monies in it to separate it out from our general fund allocation. So it doesn't look and doesn't bloat our general fund with things that are actually restricted in nature. So these would go into those accounts at the end of the year and basically stay there until we needed to use them. And so then we'd have these funds at this, what I'm saying is, I think it's by 413 plus the 49,000, so $470,000 would sit in that account until we had a need for those monies to be able to use on capital projects for the district.
Questions on this? So could this lower our next levy? Because we do have a chunk of that for building repairs.
It's a one-time monies, yes, that could lower our monies. And what we could also do in future years as well as when we had, so you know how we have carry forward in those, a lot of times we could also then move a chunk of any kind of excess that we have in the general fund over to that as well, which would then create that fund and establish some more monies in that fund. So just to keep building it up if we can, to do some additional monies. That is an option as a district we could do.
Yeah.
So this will be a new line item in our monthly budget.
It will be a new in the spreadsheet. You know how there's multiple spreadsheets. It will be its own 400 level budget. So you'll see this in there. So there's 425, which is our lottery funds. And then this one would be like a 410 or whatever is or whatever number I pick, but it's got to be in the 400 levels toward the back.
Yep. Correct. And so when I think capital, I think construction, I don't know why. And this is real estate, so that's really it, is anything construction.
Repairs, yeah, basically how we, anything big, basically to put into the district. Yeah.
And then recently we saw the construction CTE program visit with us about building the house. Does that need to come out of this, or does that come out because it's a class?
So my plan on that one was actually just to create almost like a receivable in the general fund for that. So we weren't gonna create a whole nother fund for it. And I can, the other side of that is we have in the accounting system we have Fund 100 is general fund, Fund 101 is our supplemental levy, Fund 102 is our program. And so I was gonna maybe make it like a 104,
Okay.
shift some money over to that. When it's all said and done, if you look on the audit report, it all kind of shifts to one and the state sees it all as one, but we separate it out so we know the different categories. That's kind of my thought on that one, because what's going to happen on that one is multi-year going, and the goal is that we'll have enough money in there, and that fund balance of that will basically support, so we don't have to do any kind of loans to the CTE program, so it'll basically be self-supporting.
Okay, and so you need approval on this because it was originally bond funded and you sold it as bond money, or what's the reasoning that we're doing this?
Really, it's more of, we need approval because we need approval to move it from the general fund over to another fund. So we haven't had any, and this actually isn't even included in that, in the amended budget. So this is literally something that we thought, it was like, you know what, we should really move this money after we actually got the money in. And so we're trying to make sure we segregate this money out. And since you guys adopt and give us approval for transfers, this would be that approval to transfer over to that fund and it's basically being full transparency.
It is very transparent and I love it. It's extra work for you, but I like that we're kind of keeping things in those lines that really do add more clarity and transparency to folks. So nice.
And Trustee Ross, just what you said in capital expenditures, you think construction, we have 3 big pots of money that come into us. Our lottery funds can only be spent for student occupied buildings. So you don't get to repair the warehouse, or you don't get to do anything to this building or to nutrition services. And then we have supplemental, and our practice has been not to ask for things that are not directly student related in the supplemental. So when we're selling this and putting this aside, then it creates facility money for facilities, not taking away anything from students or kids. And then hopefully we'll reinvest back into some facility.
So is the plan to save over time to buy a building or create a building that doesn't serve students?
I don't know if that's the plan. I mean, it would be nice to have some sort of, the problem is unless we put millions in there, we're not going to buy a building that is like a new district office with this account. I mean, it's not enough money to really do any of that. I mean, the hope would be that eventually we'd be able to find something or build something for the district, but I don't know if that's necessarily the plan, the reason we're doing this. It would help us to get some sort of savings towards it, but this would go to other things as well.
And I think that question is really for our facilities committee. So if it's earmarked, then facilities committee can begin to have that discussion and bring a recommendation to the board.
So we could also, since we have it now, provide property tax relief next year. Since we haven't set the budget for next year, we could reduce the levy by 400-ish, whatever is there.
So if you're saying, so the $8 million or whatever that we're projecting to ask for the 12 point some from the supplemental levy, or the $8 million for the bond fund, what you're saying is take that down by this $400,000 and use these funds for that. That is an option that we could do. I will say the new construction alone with our city will far outweigh any increases that patron will possibly get from ours, because we're keeping the same dollar amount, and any increases that happen, it just gets spread out over. It's not actually, we're not costing anybody any more money because we're getting a dollar amount. In the past, remember, we'd always get a levy rate, so when you knew we got more money. This one we're actually dollar amount, so it's really, we're not getting anything else. It's just getting spread more, and the new construction value came in at $439 million. So you think about how much tax that's going to bring into this environment. That I believe would fully support any kind of, I just don't think there's going to be an increase from our side dollar per now. I mean, your assessment went up. If your assessment went up faster than somebody else's, there's nothing we could do with that. But across the board, our dollar for dollar is gonna be less to people. For the
So
same.
the short answer is yes, it's possible.
Yes.
And can you clarify bond money, so illegal use of those funds, is that correct?
So we actually had this discussion a while ago with some previous attorneys that we got that when you buy something with bond funds, I thought we had to actually put it back toward the bond. The reality is with the legal people told us back then was when we were doing through the St. Al's stuff that we were trying to do was that we just needed to actually utilize that money in a way that the school district in a capital type of project. We couldn't use it for operations. So we couldn't use it for operational things to run and have teachers or anything like that. So it was one of those things that you just need to use it for some sort of a capital project in there. You couldn't do it. So it was Holly Troxel that did that work for us about 5 years ago. And so.
Mary, would you have any thoughts on that? Property. And we'll confirm it with our attorneys before you have to act on it later.
Absolutely. Yeah, any expenditure that we're gonna make and that needs to be reviewed, we can review that specifically with these funding mechanisms in mind and previous purchases in mind to make sure that money is being put in the right place. Yeah.
Good questions.
And I think it probably keeps us safer doing this, whether we know we have people here who know exactly what funds paid for those buildings or whatever. It keeps us safer, right? If we're continuing to use that money for the same purpose, right? I mean.
It does, because the worry I have of leaving it in the general fund is it would just get gobbled up with operational, and I don't want, and $400,000 in a full scheme of our $90 million budget is not a lot.
Yeah.
So I want to, it'd be better for us, and it establishes a practice that at the end of the year, if we find we have some more money that we can put toward capital projects, then that, I mean, we don't have a very high fund balance, let's be honest with ourselves. We're about 5.55. There are other districts with quite a bit more than us that the state, everybody is kind of going down on them and saying, you got too high of a fund balance. We don't have that problem, but it is something that the goal is to kind of have money over there that we can do these capital projects and not have to actually ask supplemental levy in the future, that we can actually fund our own projects with excess funds that we have in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Am I done? No,
Well,
I have one more.
actually, you're
Yeah, one more.
there.
I'm not speaking on
In
Not yet.
case Chairman Simpson needs any
Yes.
support.
Yeah. So the next one is the audit committee membership, and I believe trustee Ross and trustee Westfall were on that committee. And so we just wanted to talk about it. Does anybody, would you like to stay on it? Does anybody have a burning desire to be on the audit committee?
And this is just a reminder, you would make the appointments
Yeah.
in the next June meeting. So this
Yeah.
is to discuss about availability and interest, et cetera.
We could hear a little bit more about what the audit committee does.
Can you talk a little bit about that? in the
I can
timeline?
definitely
Yes.
talk. This
Thank you.
is something near and dear to me.
Yes.
It's what I did for 10 years prior to. So basically what the audit committee does is we have a couple trustees that we've asked to be on it. We have two people from the outside environment, one of which was a CPA that was in practice for a while, Jared Zweiger, and Michelle Yankovich, that used to be in my position prior to, which is a very strong accountant as well, with governmental accounting. And the biggest thing is what we try to do is have them go over, this committee is the one that deals directly with the auditors and goes over any kind of concerns the committee might have with my department or anything with the district. They'll actually tell the auditors, hey, we want you to look for this. We want you to do different things. And when the audit is done, this committee also goes and reviews the draft of the financials to make sure they agree with it. And then they will provide a recommendation to the board and of the trustees to approve the audit or not when that happens in September, October. It's really, there's 2 meetings. The first one is probably an ad hoc, which I'd probably have just digital with, so we can get that one done, because that actually has to be done here soon, because the audit actually has started officially, but we need to beat that first part. And then the other one, it doesn't happen until the audit's done in October, September, October.
I'm happy with whatever. I'm happy to spread the wealth.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to continue.
Okay. So yeah, next regular board meeting.
Whatever you decide, we're good for.
So I have 2 letters that I will need to have signed, or a letter that says we're okay to start the audit when that happens, so,
Okay,
okay, thank you.
perfect. Thank you.
Mr. Jers is here to talk about something that will actually come to you on the consent agenda. But since it's a little unusual, we wanted to walk you through it before you saw it on the consent agenda.
The memo spells it out pretty well, but following in with our board policy, we want to bring forward the item that we got quotes for and say that we were not recommending the lowest quote because of some various situations that come along with this. The best fit is the middle one for us for that one. So we wanted to get that in front of you so you were aware of it. And then you could hopefully approve it for us so we can move forward and find the extra room that we're needing here in the district office by getting rid of some of the paper.
Any questions?
So have we continued, I'm just curious, have we been using, are these old files and we've been doing digital files more recently, or is this up to like last week?
So everything up to current is pretty well paper.
Okay.
And we've just been accumulating more and more
Yeah,
paper.
okay.
So we don't have a digital system as of yet. So this is helping us get it established.
So that'll be digitized and then going forward, my assumption is that we'll not create more paper. That's the plan.
So Mr. Jers, is this the cost of just digitizing what we currently have, but not necessarily the cost moving forward to continue, or will it be costing us to continue moving forward, or will they equip us with that?
That's a good question. So there's some software cost that comes with this. It's minimal and under all our purchasing thresholds for that. Like under $20,000 annually, kind of thing for the software. So we're able to proceed with that one, and that one's not one that we have to move forward. The part that we will probably have to bid and get quotes for this is for the kind of current employee records and getting us caught up on those. There's all the former employees and records and what HR is affectionately called the cave that we would want to scan also. And that would be a separate project that we would look at later, probably in a future fiscal year. So this would be for next fiscal year, and then probably the year after that when we look at pursuing that project.
So just to clarify, Docutopia would be helping us scan only current employee records, not. And can you help me understand legally what our requirement is as far as how far back must we keep records?
So-
Is this eternal, or is it?
Our policy, it's 8605,
Okay,
and the procedure that supports it says that we keep employee records permanently.
okay.
Sir.
So there is a cave then.
They go back for a long time.
Yes, it does.
Any other?
Madam Chair, yeah, follow-up question. Legally, is it 7 years that we have to keep them?
Yeah, Trustee Ross, legally, typically agencies are required to have a policy on how long these records need to be kept. It's not necessarily outlined saying you must keep them for X amount of years. So you must have a policy. You don't have to keep them for a certain amount of time. Typically, we look at how far back would perhaps a request come in for that employee's records. And then we say, you know, we want to be on the generous end of keeping those records. And so, yeah, typically we would probably say 10 years at least. And then to the extent that the district does not have them, once everything's digitized, it's pretty easy. Most of our agencies now have digitized records to where we can keep them forever or we can keep them for a week, and it doesn't necessarily matter. If you're looking at software where the cost increases based on data that's being held, then you might want to look at that, changing that policy and saying, how long do we think we reasonably need to hold these records? And if it's not eternity, then you'd have to go through the policy process of changing that policy. But yeah, it's just required that you have a policy and you follow it. There's not necessarily a requirement for X number of years.
And our current policy is just to keep them permanently.
The schedule with it does say permanently, and that is part of our procedures. It is not formally in the policy.
And we will be reviewing 8,000 somewhere in the
Yes.
next year, so unless you want to tackle that before.
Yes.
So we learned, right, when we had our computer virus that we didn't have second party backups. And maybe it's in the RFQs. Could we potentially, before the next meeting, see the RFQs that went out for this and for legal or for anything that we're getting back from you? It'd be nice to kind of see what we asked for.
So tonight's packet had the legal RFQs in it. You had copies of those.
Yeah.
So I have this one data sheet response. Where am I missing that in Board Docs?
So for the legal, it's up in under A, 2A. That legal
There are
services
two
request.
documents, one from each of our firms.
There's their responses.
The initial was in the last meeting.
Yes, the initial was in that last meeting.
Thank you.
for legal. And then so maybe for this one.
Yeah.
We can get
So the,
whatever that was. Potentially my answer is in that RFQ.
there's not a formal like bid document for that one. There's like, we know what the project is. We've scoped kind of the project, but we haven't written a formal document like you saw for the legal RFQ for that one, because the threshold did not require us to do a sealed bid process. So we didn't publish anything or write anything up quite that formal.
So I guess I'm thinking of a scope of work.
Okay.
So that, because I'm asking a question saying, hey, are they gonna keep a second, or is someone else gonna keep a second backup for that? And when I'm thinking, well, maybe that answer is in the scope of work and I just don't know that.
So the scanning scope of work doesn't include that. The software and that we've looked at does include that information, and we can provide all that stuff, I've got all that for you. Because that's separate, because them scanning them in is a one-time action by a company, and then this storage is in a software called Trino, and is hosted in the cloud and has all the backups and cybersecurity stuff. We've asked all the questions. We've got all the details that probably you're looking for, plus some.
Yeah, that would be helpful. I would love to see that. Thank you.
So to clarify, you would just like to see that in the consent agenda along with this information?
That would be helpful. Okay. And then you mentioned that you'd like to go with the middle one.
Mhm.
Would you mind expanding on some of those reasons why?
Yeah, the last paragraph tries to spell it out, but basically it comes down to companies would either want to put somebody here on site to scan stuff, or there's logistics of trying to take kind of active records out of our building and store them somewhere else, and then all of a sudden we need to access them and get them back, and kind of some headaches that come along with that. So the best option is coming from the Docutopia, who actually has a small bus that they come and they put the people in, and basically the documents go outside, they come back inside. And it's all here kind of on property while doing it, but we don't have to provide space inside the building to accomplish this. So that's the single biggest advantage for that. Most of it is around space constraints here in the district office.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay.
All right, we have an initial policy review. This is not a first read, it is a review. Remember, after this review, we will put this out on our website for public input. So if you have any public input before you actually see it. As a first read, that was a change in policy that we instituted just not very long ago. These are two policies that kind of complete our 1000 series review. 1630 basically is intact as is ISBA policy. And then 1640, you asked us to kind of take the 1640 structure and insert some language from 1650. And so you can see that. I think it's actually blue line. At least that's what I think it looked like on my computer. So those are the two policies that we would have you look at for first read at the end of this month.
Then I just need a handbook to review.
Any?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
maybe just a little discussion amongst us. Because I think this is new, right? We're talking about doing an annual review. And right now we're doing a monthly at our meetings. Do we like our monthly ones? Do we want to alter that or just add on something at the year? I don't know, just random discussion.
Is it policy that we review, that we do the evaluation at the end of each meeting, or is that tradition?
It's just practice, tradition, practice,
I don't think
yeah.
it's written in policy
No,
anywhere. I think this
no.
is the only one you're
Right,
looking at that would be new for.
Right.
I mean, we could take all of them and be like, here it is, we did it. you know?
Yeah, that's true.
Right, or completely revamp, but I think it's just an opportunity.
Yeah, so this was one that through that, our new process of looking at the thousands. Actually, both of these, it really was 3 total that that we had kind of said like, oh, we're maybe interested in this process. And then trustee Westfall and myself looked at and kind of went through it and said, this is slightly different in that it's at the conclusion of the year, not so much. So it's a broader goal, I think, instead of just that every meeting kind of goal for 1630. Where then the other ones, was like Superintendent Keller said, that combination of the 2 in looking at how do we incorporate this with our working on our handbook as well and working through those things. I don't know that as far as looking at what we're doing with our policies, where we've only gone through the thousands at this point. I mean, I think discussion is important and key, but maybe a little bit early unless there was something that we found didn't work in looking at the thousands. I mean, I think what I heard from us in previous work sessions about it was liking having those links in the document that we could pull up and see and having, the ISBA stuff there. But if there are things that we feel like are missing from that process or that, oh, we didn't really need that or utilize that is that kind of what you're talking about? Or are
Yeah,
you speaking
no,
specifically to
no.
these 2?
I'm just like opening up.
Yeah,
dialogue,
yeah,
really.
yeah, no, I wanted to make sure.
I think this one, I think I thought I heard in your question, do we like the monthly, and I do. And then I think this would be more sort of like a end of the year summative, evaluations. So we do our, how are we doing each month? How did we do tonight? Which is all that we really talk about on that monthly one, where this would be, how have we done this year? And how are we as a board? That's how I read this. And I like that. I think that's helpful because I think they're 2 different things. How did tonight go versus how's the board functioning? So.
Madam Chair, in the language here, it says at the conclusion of each year, is this in reference to December, or is this the reference of a school year or reference like?
You think December?
Well, because your board could change, right, in January.
True.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's where it's kind of tricky
Calendar.
because but I do agree since
Do that.
I know since they
Really
switch
don't like
things
it.
up on us. If it's, because we could have new board members in January. So I do think it would make sense
The end of this.
at the end of the calendar year to be evaluating and part of, in that goal setting and norms process that we've been talking about and working through. To me, that would be more of the things like, here's our goals.
Sure.
Yeah, no, that. whole
Here's how as a
process.
board, we're gonna measure. And I think part of it may be new in us trying to figure out, what does that evaluation look like, right? I
Right.
mean, having a good evaluation tool is just as important as saying we're gonna do it.
Right.
Which, I mean, on a separate note, even our monthly regular board meeting evaluation tool sometimes I think is not maybe the best tool that we're looking at to evaluate ourselves and the things that we're doing, but even just making sure, so it may be relatively new, especially since this is something we haven't done, but trying to figure out what does that look like and how do we set it? And I think part of it is aligning to that, to this change of January is the new, the new switch, and how do we align some of those things moving forward, because we're typically, for the district, setting goals for the next year, late in the spring and right now and moving forward, but it may look different for the board. I mean, and thinking about those things and how that works.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think as I hear everyone talk and go through that, it feels like that last sentence, right, is the key sentence on the team building. And we've always talked about like board retreat. Well, maybe it's not a board retreat that we've never done, but now in policy, it says, no, we're evaluating ourselves. We're gonna do the board evaluation. And the board evaluation is the get together, is the team building, is the decision making and the planning and the communication, just basically everything in that last sentence. But like you said, if it's not in a policy and we don't start, then we don't do. We talk about it, but it never actually gets calendared.
Well, and to me, as reading that last sentence, thinking about, for me, I feel like it's not like we have to evaluate every single one of those things
Right.
every year, where it might be, we're talking about policy, because we've implemented this year a new, monthly kind of, I know we have a little bit of break here in the summer because we don't have staff working on the policy, but really evaluating that, like, do we feel like it met the goals that we had as trustees to be engaged in that process and begin reviewing and looking over those policies and keeping them, relevant to what's happening in our community and what our community wants. And so maybe that's what, this year, just a suggestion, is something that we go ahead and tackle and look at, or put a couple things on there. Yeah.
There's that line 8 on policy 1630 where it talks about generally accepted principles of successful board operations.
Yeah.
And we had started off with Thomas Alsbury, and then we moved away from that because it had a whole structure behind it, and we kind of leaned into ISBA. And I think they have 8 standards. I don't know how many, but we have standards for superintendent, and Danielson has its framework. But it might be good to have that framework. And then how do we know whether we're basic or improving or whatever,
Right, yeah.
And how do we pick that? Because some of the words on line 12, like motivation and influence, I wonder how measurable that is. We could create a goal that we all show up and pay attention, but
Right.
I just wondered about those being vague. But it would be nice, I think, to have the principles that what we're aiming for, because if I remember right, you talked more about student achievement.
Yeah.
70% of your meeting versus operation stuff.
Yeah. Definitely. So I'm not really hearing any sort of changes. Spent a lot of time on 1630. Want to make sure 1640, where it's in-service conference for trustees, just talking about that, the trainings that ISBA offers, as well as then, we said, handbook, working to get that.
I think I did hear a clarification of calendar year.
Yes,
So that
thank
it's
you.
not
Yes.
confusing.
Yeah.
So 1640, didn't we talk about who's doing the orientation or how we're gonna facilitate that? Do we have a good means? If we're gonna put this into play?
So I think, well, one, I do think the handbook is a big one. And to me, I feel like we just have a natural deadline of November, right? Like that we should get that done by then. Like it's a good one. And I know trustee Kip has been working on some things as well, and I'll work on some things, and we'll be bringing that back to you soon. But yeah, we did talk about who's responsible. I think a lot is, especially with the orientation, is we didn't really specify who should do it, other than I know that there were multiple, I don't know, do you guys feel like there were
Potential
multiple avenues for help with answering, asking, things like that. As you started, I know ISBA training kind of has looked different this last year, but there is training right through them. So I don't know if we do either want to go down the route of say, here's who's gonna do it and how we're gonna do it.
Or we just.
Or just
wordsmith
we
that
say,
part.
yeah, really. I mean,
Yeah, the handbook becomes kind of a real key part of that orientation,
I think
certainly.
it does,
You
yeah,
know, the handbook has a lot of good orienting material in it. I've been moving it around actually, and I think Mandy's gonna have a chance to look at it before it comes back to this body. And what I did is kind of what Trustee Keller and we talked about in here. What are those things I need to know right now? Like what do I need to know this week? And moving that stuff to the top of the handbook. And then the more the things you need to know, but you don't need to know for the board meeting this week,
Yeah.
you know, a little later, so that a new trustee can come to the handbook and really get some help right, you know, right now.
Jumpstart,
Here's,
yeah.
you know, here's your duties and responsibilities, all of those kind of boilerplate things that I think are important. And that would have helped me, I think, to have that a little more, the order of it matters, I think.
yeah,
In the
oh,
handbook, you
definitely,
know?
yeah,
Because it's 60 some pages and you can get overwhelmed with like, whoa, what's here, as opposed to, you know, this is what you need. This is your duties and responsibilities. This is how board meeting runs. This is the point. This is the 70%, 30%.
well, and I think especially with the change, right, in January, it's different jumping in to a school year in January as a trustee compared to July, right? I mean, so I mean, and I think looking at it that way, the order definitely matters because there are things for that January meeting that otherwise you might like be, why, is this how we always do our regular meeting, you know, and it's not. So,
Right.
so yeah.
Yeah. And hopefully, when, you know, folks would be engaged along from November on,
Yeah,
Yeah, whether
you know,
right,
and that maybe the chair, a role of the chair or leadership would be to reach out to
right.
and say, here,
Newly elected.
start
and-
following it
yeah.
up.
That seems to be the most, in my mind too, that seems like the most natural place that the chair would, you know,
Yeah.
chair and the clerk, the superintendent would, you know, provide the handbook, answer questions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
That's what we did with, I think, the chair and the vice chair.
Yeah, that was
We're able to
helpful to
reach
me
out.
when I was put in August. They met, and, you know, kind of.
And it was easy because we didn't have to establish a quorum because she wasn't sworn in yet.
It's helpful.
Right.
It was helpful.
yeah,
Maybe I'm just caught up on semantics then between the word orientation and handbook in here. As we're.
yeah, is that, yeah,
orientation might not be, I think orientation is more general here rather than a thing like an event. I think it's
That's
a,
how.
I think
Yeah.
it's more of just, you know, orient them, you know, show them where the
Yeah.
scope is rather than an orientation, like.
Yeah,
It
college.
feels like an
Yeah.
event, it does,
Yeah.
and we don't quite have that yet, but we're working.
No,
But it says it's practical.
yeah, yeah. And I think as all things, the trustee handbook would be a public document. So people even before deciding to run as a trustee, right? Like
That'd be
those are
really
things
helpful.
that
Is this for?
that you can at least look at and see, right?
No, I like it. I like both of these policies. They're things that we're aspiring to.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Thank you. So next, interest-based bargaining update, and I think we all know we've switched to interest-based bargaining. And so I just wanted to take questions and Craig is also here. We didn't really prep anything. I just kind of wanted to talk to you about where we are in the process because it is different. You know, we finished 2 months ago for the current year. And so we both teams decided like we're going to take a little bit of a break. And so we have met three times. Part of which was the first two were really setting up our norms and doing things through that process. This last meeting last week, we got an update on insurance and then also on just budget. Randy, same budget that everybody's seen, updated and talked about, you know, our unit count at 640. You guys have heard that number plenty. And so talking there, we do this week have a CAPS meeting tomorrow afternoon. And so the difference here is the CAPS, and I really should have came with what that acronym means. We joke about it, that none of us really remember what the CAPS stands for. But so it's a smaller group of the negotiation team that will get together to talk about salary options. And then that team will bring it to the negotiation team. Like we're a smaller group, you know, it's much easier to vet through and work through different things and pull things up. And we of course work, Randy works with us to vet those numbers and go through that process. So we're accurately determining what things would look like and throwing out options. And then Thursday, we have our next negotiation meeting as a team. I know insurance is one that we're trying to get approved because it does have a hard, fast deadline. But I want to remind you that, you know, the interest-based bargaining process does look different. It's not so much that like, here's what we're going to offer and they're going to come back. It's where we're just talking about like, what are all the possible solutions to this specific issue or problem? And that's what the team kind of decides, like, what are the issues or problems? And then what are possible things, solutions or ways that we can look at this to solving this problem and working together. It is unanimous. So if one person on the team says, oh, I'm not there, like, I don't think so, we reevaluate, like, are you close? What is it in this solution that you're not liking? Or do we just need to back up completely? Which I actually kind of like that part of things. It does make it a little bit tougher when everybody has to be unanimous in things, but it really digs down. And sometimes you hear things that you're like, oh, I never really thought about this concern or this aspect of things. And so, yeah, and I know we are still relatively new. I will say myself included, we get back into that old method of like, well, we think we should do this. Like, where are you at? You know? And so we're really trying to work as a team to not fall back into those types of things. But again, I just kind of wanted to throw that it's really general. We're not super far into things at this point, but if you guys have questions or for myself or for Greg, please ask.
So the interest-based bargaining general, I mean, what you just said, that's the sum total of what I know about it, you know, besides what we've talked about all the way.
Yeah.
So I'm confessing that I'm ignorant, but it sounds like you do a lot of brainstorming then, that instead of just saying, we'll give you this, but you just talk about it more holistically. And that sounds helpful. And then just to clarify, and you can comment and tell me I'm right or wrong on that, but then, so it has to be unanimous, the whole group.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that is challenging. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, and good, you know.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, can you remind me, I know I've seen this, and so I apologize that I'm not remembering, how many people total are on this negotiation team? You talk about CAPS, which is a smaller number.
Yeah.
So when you need a unanimous vote, are we talking 40 people? Are we talking 10 people? I'm sorry that I can't remember.
12.
12, I was gonna say 12, but now I'm not sure.
Okay, so when you meet as a CAPS group, that's more like 3, 4, 5 people and then 12. Okay, I was suddenly like, is this a really big group? I'm sorry that I know I've seen the list and I can't remember. So this interest-based, is this something that you recently had training on? Is that correct?
So the team together has recently done training.
So everyone's been trained on this, and so now it's stepping in and really putting it to use.
And so this is the third year as a district that we've used this.
Okay,
So
this is
still relatively new.
okay, but this is what you used last year as well?
Yep, and the previous year. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Yes.
Mandy, you've done both processes. What do you see as the advantage or the pro cons of interest-based?
Well, one, I think the older model is really like becomes confrontational and kind of us versus them, like kind of format and kind of push and pull, where we're here. To me, it feels safer to be, I think things come out of it and we have discussions that sometimes somebody will say like, I don't feel good about how we worked as a team in this meeting. And we all are able to pause and go, okay, let's think about like what happened, what played out, who said what happened, like, okay. We can analyze and reflect a little bit on that, where, that traditional, even the seating is very, it's this side against this side and it's back and forth. We still have caucuses where the teams will separate and meet, but I feel like we have less caucuses because we're able to just talk through those problems together and be like, but here's the holdup. Like, this is where this group of people is hung up on this and this group of people is hung up on this piece, and where can we find some middle ground? I think it gives a little more freedom to throw out some ideas that otherwise maybe never would have, because it's not really it's not last best offer. It's like, what are all the options we can kind of look at and then move forward. So, and it does take practice and like, does take your team, getting to know one another and work through things to trust, like, here's what we're all in it for. Is that hopefully help? Yeah.
So last year's team, I imagine, is very similar to this year's team then.
It is similar. We
Since it
have,
takes time to get to know. And
we have 2 new members,
3 technically.
three new members this year.
Was the new association president part of it last year?
Yes,
So was he
yes,
the
Brian.
vice president or something? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Didn't at one point we have like a third party kind of mediator, facilitator? So tell me about that, why we don't have that.
Well, so I don't know, there might be a couple different things, but
I don't know.
so there are, not within these last 3 years, we haven't,
Okay.
but prior to that.
Then that's part of the other system. So I'm just gonna say, I'm really concerned about how long we went last year. And so I'm trying to understand, what are we changing different for this year? And maybe I'm the only one that was so uncomfortable continuing out so long. I've already heard the district administration say, we want that to be quicker, but we've got the same team, we've got this similar team. There's 3 new, similar process, and we've got to go with every unanimous. How are we? Is anyone else concerned about dragging it out through the whole school year and not closing?
I'm not so much, because I think the team really felt the pressure of it dragging throughout the entire year. And all of us going, we can't meet this many times.
I would say the most significant change is legislature has met and decided, and we know.
And we have funding, where last year we
didn't have
didn't.
that till March of this year.
The other thing that hurt last year was all the budget cuts that came in late. We did not know if money was going to come in, and nothing really moved until money came in. And that was the issue last year that held us up, was the drastic budget cuts from the governor and the unknown. And then of course the enrollment that came in also didn't help. So there was a lot of unknowns until the money came in, and then we actually settled fairly quickly.
Yeah.
So in thinking through, just for us as a board to try to be helpful, and whether it is or not, just tell me, because I'm just spitballing at this point. If we as a board, maybe would it be helpful, or you just let you do your process and let it go, or to say, hey, you're talking about insurance, can we set some deadline dates so that as a group, they're like, hey, the board really wants us to have insurance dialed in by this date and this date to kind of get things moved along, or should I just be more patient?
Well, I think insurance specifically has its own deadline date anyway.
Right,
Yeah.
Just kind of,
So
but we.
it is one of those things. I think the tough part is really, I don't know that the board really wants to come down and be like, we want a decision by this date. Like, it's a process.
Yeah.
Um,
Is there anything we can do to help to ensure that we move things along a little quicker this year?
I don't know that there's anything outside of the group working on that. And I don't know, Greg might, I feel like most of the group is,
I think you're always,
Yeah.
as a board member, welcome to share whether you'd like something done or not. It does not
Right.
necessarily mean the team
Yeah.
is gonna get you unanimous agreement. I think the best thing you can do is be informed about the issues, about what occurs. And
I mean, I would never do that as an individual board member. I would
Right.
say
allow the
utilize
process to
discussion
kind of
Right.
Talk about, yeah.
again, prior to the COVID situations and the budget constraints and the unknowns that lasted for so long, the other process went fairly well the first year. So this will be our third year, so give us another opportunity to see how it goes.
Okay.
We would like to get settled sooner rather than later, of course. But because of that one ended so late, it did push this one late. So I think that's kind of naturally into it.
Okay,
It is a process that does take most of the year. Boise School District does do IBB. They take about 8 or 9 months to do it throughout the school year. They typically settle towards the end of the year, which is what we'd like to do. Because we ended last year so late, we're starting late.
okay, so their process is similar, kind of takes that similar amount of time.
It does.
So that's good to know. But when you say they end the year, that's for the next,
Correct. So typically, the Boise School
Okay.
District starts September, October, which is actually when we would normally.
right?
And we would meet once a month or twice a month, and then usually a little bit more during spring, and we typically try to end in May or June.
Yeah.
But because the last process went all the way to April, we weren't able to get started in time, so it is delaying us a little bit. I hope to get us caught back up and get us back on our schedule again.
Right.
We do have a trainer that did work with us. We've actually been trained by 2 different trainers. One of our trainers, Emily, who worked with us remotely last year, she will be coming into the Boise School District to do training with their board sometime this fall. So if the board is interested in having a short training, we can arrange that and maybe have that for you guys if you'd like. Maybe like ask some of those questions too.
Sure.
and I think, I do think that that's a large part of it was just the unknown.
Was the unknown
Was the
legislature
unknown.
of the budget of what was
Yeah.
the money coming in so that we knew what to do, even though we had established a budget.
Yeah. Just thinking of all the
Okay,
change, I think, like, had we finished before the end of the summer, there was a point in the fall that I was nervous with different cuts that had ended up coming through that I was like, oh, great, we're gonna be in trouble if we had ended where we were at this point. And then it was like, as it got closer and closer to December, it was like, oh my word, we for sure would have been in trouble, and then things changed, obviously, as Randy talked about that replacement, money, and it did shift things from our discretionary, but it went back into salary and benefits. And to be honest, we had an actual unit count that wasn't a projected unit count. It was a hard, fast, this is what our unit count is, which does make a difference, which I actually, we have this weird calendar year, school year that we're talking about and fluxing from, like, where it's like in January, if we were making these decisions, a lot of those unit counts would be a little bit solid numbers, right? So it's just based on the system and how trying to do that. I don't think anybody's trying to prolong or anything. We actually did a lot of work in the last year, contract language work and things like that. And I think even though folks were frustrated that we took so much time and waiting and getting there, I walked away from it going, we did a lot of things and had really good discussion. And so we'll see. The other part that I think is tough, we think it's hard to get a date and a time for all 5 of us to meet and do things, but then for them to ratify, sometimes it is typically a lot harder in the summer than during the school year, because your people are on vacation and doing different things because they're not working. So that's one thing that I think typically has, if it's not done before folks leave, then.
no, thank you for explaining and the assurances of kind of what's gonna be different and helpful this year, so I appreciate that.
So, Madam Chair, I hear you saying because a lot of work was done last year and things are put into place this year, especially legislation, you feel confident that things will probably move quicker this year than they did last year.
I'm feeling that way, but it's hard to tell.
Can't guarantee it.
I can't guarantee it, but I feel confident about it based on the work that was done.
Yeah, thanks.
So,
Thank you. Thank you for doing that work. too.
Yes.
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 From your experience, do you think it's necessary for a trustee to continue to serve? I know we talked about it earlier.
You know, and I've told you guys, I enjoy the problem solving process aspect of it and just really enjoy it. The work and the problem solving and doing that stuff. I do think it's helpful, especially because this is one of the things, that our board is tasked to do. But it's also been typically one of those things that the board is very far removed from, right? So having someone sit on that team and that committee, I think is helpful, even, for a discussion like this, right? And trying to bring it back and talk about it and here's what's happening. And obviously we don't have big things. We're early on in the process, so didn't have a lot of information to share other than the procedure and the process, but.
I feel like it's one of the biggest things we do.
Yeah.
Takes up a lot of our budget. and
Yeah.
To be that, and to be able to have, you put in that time and do that.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. It is nice to have. So,
Yeah, thank you for that.
do other boards not typically have a member on the team?
This district in the past sometimes hasn't had a trustee involved. So.
I know, I don't think Boise does, West Ada doesn't.
There are smaller districts where the whole team is the board.
I was gonna say, there, yeah. I think in Teton, there are at least 2 or 3 members of the board that are on their
Just board.
negotiation team.
Or admin.
Admin and a board member.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like it's just
Not
one of
both.
the things we have.
Yeah,
Varies.
It
so,
just varies.
yeah, it does. But- Okay. I think we are there. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Feels good, just short of 2 hours. Yep.
Can you play for pomp and circumstance?
Not go on our evaluation. 6 months, we got there. Thank you, guys. Thank you all that were here.